The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast expanse of sand and rock that shimmered under the merciless Afghan sun. The temperature had already climbed past 110 degrees, and it was barely past noon. Lieutenant Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his brow as he studied the terrain through his binoculars, scanning the ridgeline for any sign of movement. Behind him, his team of 8 Navy SEALs moved with practiced silence, their boots barely making a sound on the rocky ground despite the weight of their gear. This mission had seemed straightforward during the briefing back at the forward operating base. Intelligence had indicated a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for orchestrating attacks on coalition forces, was holed up in a small village nestled in the mountains. The plan was simple: infiltrate under cover of darkness, capture or eliminate the target, and extract before dawn. But, as Chun had learned during his 6 years as a SEAL, simple plans rarely survive contact with reality. The team had inserted via helicopter 3 hours before sunrise, landing in a dried riverbed 5 kilometers from their objective. The flight in had been tense, the helicopter skimming low over the terrain to avoid detection by enemy radar. Chin could still feel the vibration of the rotors in his chest as they had touched down, the dust cloud kicked up by the landing obscuring everything for precious seconds. Then, they were moving, spreading out in a tactical formation as the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the night sky. Sarah Mitchell moved near the center of the formation, her M4 carbine held at the ready. At 28, she was one of the few female soldiers who had successfully completed the grueling training required to serve in special operations. Her role was officially listed as intelligence specialist, but everyone on the team knew she was far more than that. Mitchell had proven herself in a dozen firefights, her marksmanship skills and cool head under pressure earning the respect of even the most skeptical team members. She had grown up in rural Montana, learning to shoot almost as soon as she could walk. Her father, a former Marine sniper, had taught her that shooting wasn't about strength or aggression. It was about patience, breathing, and the ability to make your body perfectly still even when your heart was racing. Those lessons had served her well through years of training and combat. Now, as she scanned the terrain around them, her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, ready to move in a fraction of a second if needed. The village appeared ahead of them as they crested a low rise. It was smaller than the intelligence photos had suggested, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a central square. Most were traditional mud brick construction, their flat roofs and small windows designed to keep out the heat. A single minaret rose from what appeared to be a small mosque at the eastern edge of the settlement. Chin raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. They dropped into defensive positions, each SEAL covering a different sector. Chin activated his radio, speaking in a low whisper. "Overwatch, this is ground team. We have eyes on the village." Requesting final confirmation on target location. The response crackled through his earpiece after a moment. "Ground team, Overwatch. Target is confirmed in the northern compound, second building from the corner. Thermal imaging shows approximately 6 individuals inside. No movement detected in surrounding structures." 6 individuals. Chin processed this information quickly. Their intelligence had suggested the target would have minimal security, maybe 2 or 3 bodyguards at most. 6 was more than expected, but still within acceptable parameters. He glanced at his watch. They had another 90 minutes until sunrise. Plenty of time to execute the mission and reach the extraction point. He signaled to his team, using hand gestures to communicate the plan. They would split into 2 elements. The primary assault team would breach the target building from the north and south simultaneously. Mitchell would remain with the security element, positioned on the ridgeline overlooking the village to provide overwatch and early warning of any threats. It was a standard configuration, one they had practiced countless times. Mitchell moved to her position without a word, finding a spot behind a cluster of rocks that offered both concealment and a clear field of fire. She set up her M4 on its bipod and settled in, controlling her breathing as she scanned the village through her scope. The night vision device turned the darkness into shades of green, every detail sharp and clear. She could see the assault team moving into position, shadows flowing between buildings with practiced efficiency. The radio clicked twice in her ear, Chin's signal that the assault team was ready. Mitchell keyed her own radio. Overwatch set. All sectors clear. Then, everything went wrong. The explosion came without warning, a massive fireball erupting from the ground just meters from where the assault team had been advancing. The blast wave rolled over Mitchell's position a second later, and she instinctively pressed herself flat against the rocks. Her ears rang from the concussion, but her training took over immediately. She brought her rifle up, scanning for targets through the scope. The village had come alive. Doors flew open and figures emerged, at least 20 men that Mitchell could see, all armed with AK-47s and RPGs. They moved with military precision, not the scattered chaos of militia fighters, but the coordinated movements of trained soldiers. This wasn't a Taliban commander with a few bodyguards. This was an ambush. Mitchell's radio exploded with chatter. Chin's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the circumstances. IED strike, we have casualties. Fall back to secondary rally point. Overwatch, we need cover fire now. She didn't hesitate. Her first shot took down a fighter who had emerged from a doorway, rifle raised. The man dropped instantly, and Mitchell was already acquiring her next target. The training her father had drilled into her took over completely. Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. Move to the next target. Each shot was deliberate, precise. She wasn't spraying bullets hoping to hit something. Every round counted. Below, she could see the assault team pulling back, dragging 2 wounded SEALs between them. Enemy fighters were pouring out of buildings, moving to cut off their retreat. Mitchell shifted her aim, targeting the men in front. One dropped, then another. She was dimly aware of other team members firing from different positions, but her focus remained absolute. The scope showed her everything she needed to see, and muscle memory guided every movement. A group of 5 fighters emerged from an alley, trying to flank the retreating SEALs. Mitchell adjusted her aim, accounting for the distance and slight wind. Her first shot took the lead man in the chest. The second fighter went down before the first had hit the ground. The remaining 3 scattered, but Mitchell tracked them with mechanical efficiency. 2 more fell before they could find cover. The 5th made it behind a wall, but she kept her crosshairs on the spot, waiting. Chin's team had made it to a defensive position behind a low wall, but they were pinned down by heavy fire from multiple directions. Mitchell could see muzzle flashes from at least 15 different positions. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides, and more fighters were arriving every minute. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a carefully planned trap, and the SEALs had walked right into it. Her radio crackled again. Overwatch, this is ground team leader. We are heavily engaged and taking fire from multiple positions. 2 casualties, both stable but unable to move on their own. We need immediate air support and medical evacuation. How copy? Mitchell keyed her radio while continuing to scan for targets. Copy all, ground team leader. I count approximately 30 enemy fighters, possibly more in reserve. You have hostiles attempting to flank from your 6 o'clock. She didn't wait for a response. The fighters trying to flank Chin's position had emerged from cover, thinking they were concealed by the darkness and distance. They were wrong. Mitchell's first shot dropped the man in front, and she smoothly transitioned to the next target. Her breathing remained steady, her movements economical. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, just the smooth repetition of acquire, aim, fire, acquire next target. The enemy fighters who had been advancing on Chin's position suddenly found themselves under accurate fire from an unexpected direction. 3 more went down in rapid succession. The survivors dove for cover, their flanking attempt broken. Mitchell heard Chun on the radio, coordinating with air support, but she filtered it out. Her job was to keep the enemy off balance, to give her team time to organize their defense and evacuate the wounded. A technical vehicle, a Toyota pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, roared into the village square. The gunner swung the weapon toward the pinned-down SEALs, and Mitchell knew that if he opened fire, her teammates would be cut to pieces. She shifted her aim, compensating for the moving target. The vehicle was at least 400 meters away, bouncing over the rough ground. A difficult shot, but not impossible. She led the target slightly, accounting for the vehicle's movement and the time the bullet would take to reach it. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the gunner jerk backward, and fall from the truck bed. The driver hit the brakes, and Mitchell fired again, this time aiming for the engine block. The truck shuddered to a halt, smoke beginning to pour from under the hood. But there was no time to celebrate the successful shot. More enemy fighters were moving into position, and Mitchell could see several with RPGs preparing to fire. Those rocket-propelled grenades could devastate the SEALs' defensive position. She prioritized the RPG gunners, knowing they represented the greatest immediate threat. Her first shot caught one man just as he was raising the launcher to his shoulder. He went down, and the RPG clattered to the ground unfired. The second RPG gunner had better cover. Mitchell could only see part of his shoulder and head as he prepared to fire. It was a small target, made smaller by distance and the darkness. But she had made shots like this before, and she would make them again. She steadied her breathing, let half the breath out, and squeezed the trigger. The man slumped forward, the RPG falling from his hands. Chen's voice came through her earpiece again, sounding slightly more optimistic. Overwatch, good shooting. You just saved our asses. Air support is inbound. ETA 8 minutes. Can you keep the pressure on until they arrive? Mitchell didn't bother responding with words. She simply double-clicked her radio and continued firing. 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours in a firefight, but complaining wouldn't change anything. She would do her job, and her team would do theirs. That was what SEALs did. The enemy fighters were becoming more cautious now, aware that there was a skilled marksman somewhere in the darkness picking them off. They moved more carefully, using cover more effectively. But they were also getting angrier, more desperate. Mitchell could see them attempting to organize for a coordinated assault on Chen's position. If they managed to rush the SEALs from multiple directions simultaneously, even her accurate fire might not be enough to stop them. She focused on the men who appeared to be leaders, the ones gesturing and organizing the others. Take out the leaders, and the attack would lose coordination. It was a tactic as old as warfare itself, and it remained effective. Her next 3 shots each took down a man who had been directing others. The enemy's movements became more disorganized, more hesitant. But they still had numbers on their side, and they knew it. Mitchell counted at least 25 fighters still in action, and there could be more she couldn't see. Her ammunition wouldn't last forever. She had started with 7 magazines, 30 rounds each. She had already gone through 3 magazines, and was halfway through her 4th. That left roughly 100 rounds. Enough for now, but she would need to make every shot count more than ever. A new group of fighters appeared from the eastern edge of the village, fresh reinforcements joining the battle. Mitchell swore quietly. The situation was deteriorating. Even with air support inbound, her team might not be able to hold out if the enemy decided to press their numerical advantage. She keyed her radio again. Ground team leader, I have additional enemy forces entering from the east. Count as at least 10 more fighters. They're moving to surround your position. Chen's response was terse. Copy. We're preparing to displace, to alternate position on my mark. Overwatch, we're going to need heavy suppression on the eastern group. Can you deliver? Mitchell was already shifting her aim. Ready when you are. Stand by. 3, 2, 1 mark. She opened fire on the eastern group of fighters, shooting as fast as she could while maintaining accuracy. The enemy had been advancing confidently, believing they were moving into position undetected. Mitchell's fire tore into their ranks, and they scattered. She dropped 4 in the first 10 seconds, and the rest went to ground, returning fire wildly in her general direction. Bullets cracked through the air around her position, impacting the rocks she was using for cover. Chips of stone stung her face, but Mitchell didn't flinch. She calmly acquired another target and fired. The man had thought he was safely concealed behind a low wall. He wasn't. Mitchell's bullet found him, and he went down. Below, Chen's team was moving, using the suppression she was providing to break contact and fall back to a more defensible position. They moved in pairs, each covering the other as they bounded backward. It was a fighting withdrawal, executed with the precision that came from countless hours of training. The enemy tried to pursue, but Mitchell made them pay for every meter they advanced. Her rifle barked steadily, each shot claiming another target. The new position Chun had chosen was better, a cluster of buildings that offered protection from multiple directions and limited the approaches the enemy could use. The SEALs fortified it quickly, turning it into a strong point. But they were still surrounded, still outnumbered, and running low on ammunition. Mitchell herself was down to her 5th magazine. 45 rounds left. She would have to be even more selective with her targets. The sound of jet engines suddenly cut through the noise of the firefight. Mitchell looked up and saw the beautiful sight of an F-16 fighter streaking across the sky, its afterburners glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The air support had arrived. Chen was on the radio, coordinating with the pilot, directing strikes on the enemy positions. Moments later, the first bomb fell. The explosion was enormous, a wall of flame and pressure that swept across the northern edge of the village. Enemy fighters who had been advancing on Chen's position were caught in the blast. Those who weren't killed outright by the explosion were thrown to the ground, disoriented and wounded. The fighter made another pass, dropping a second bomb on a building that intelligence identified as the enemy command post. The structure disintegrated, collapsing into rubble. But the fight wasn't over. Enough enemy fighters had survived the airstrikes to remain a serious threat. They fell back to more defensive positions, continuing to fire on the SEALs. Mitchell could see them regrouping, preparing for another assault. They knew that air support couldn't stay overhead indefinitely, and they were willing to wait for their chance. Chen's voice came through her radio again. Overwatch, extraction helicopters are inbound. ETA 15 minutes. We need to hold this position and prepare a landing zone. The enemy is going to throw everything they have at us when they hear those birds coming. Can you hold your position and continue providing overwatch? Mitchell surveyed her situation. She had 45 rounds left, no backup, and at least 15 enemy fighters still combat effective. The position she occupied was good, but exposed. Once the sun came up fully, she would be clearly visible to anyone looking in her direction. And the enemy definitely knew someone was up on this ridgeline shooting at them. They would come for her soon. But her team needed her. The wounded needed to be evacuated. The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the valley with golden light that turned the landscape from shadows to stark reality. Mitchell blinked against the brightness, her eyes tired from hours of staring through the night vision scope. She flipped the device up, relying now on her natural vision and the magnification of her rifle's optic. The change in visibility was both a blessing and a curse. She could see better now, identify targets more clearly. But the enemy could see her too. She took the moment of relative calm to reload, ejecting her partially spent magazine and replacing it with a fresh one. 45 rounds total left, spread across 2 magazines. She would need to make each shot count more than ever. Below, Chen's team was preparing the landing zone, clearing debris from a flat area adjacent to their defensive position. The wounded were being prepared for transport, their gear stripped down to essential items to reduce weight. Mitchell could see the enemy fighters watching from their positions around the village. They were waiting, biding their time. They knew what was coming, knew that helicopters would soon arrive. And they would do everything in their power to prevent those helicopters from landing or, failing that, to shoot them down as they departed. Mitchell's jaw tightened. That couldn't be allowed to happen. The radio crackled in her ear. All units, this is Raptor 7-1. We are inbound to your position, ETA 10 minutes. Be advised, we are receiving reports of possible enemy anti-aircraft weapons in the area. We'll be coming in fast and low. Landing zone must be clear and secure. Chen responded immediately. Raptor 7-1, ground team leader. Landing zone is being prepared now. Be advised, we are still in contact with enemy forces. Estimate 15 to 20 hostiles remaining in the area. Request you come in from the west, using the ridgeline for cover. Copy that, ground team leader. Approaching from the west. Mark your position with IR strobe. Mitchell watched as one of the SEALs activated an infrared strobe light, invisible to the naked eye, but clearly visible to anyone wearing night vision equipment or using the sensors on the helicopter. It would guide the pilots in, giving them a precise reference point for the landing. It would also tell every enemy fighter in the area exactly where the Americans were concentrated. As if on cue, the enemy forces began to stir. Mitchell saw them moving, gathering in groups, preparing for what they clearly intended to be a final assault. They were going to rush the SEAL position, try to overrun it before the helicopters could land. It was a desperate move, but It might work if they could achieve surprise or overwhelm the defenders with sheer numbers. Mitchell keyed her radio. Ground team leader, enemy forces are massing for an assault. I count at least 12 fighters moving into position on your north and east sides. They're preparing to rush your position. Chen's response was calm, professional. Copy. All team members, prepare for assault from north and east. Establish fields of fire and prepare grenades. Overwatch, engage at will. Priority targets are anyone carrying RPGs or heavy weapons. Mitchell was already scanning the enemy fighters, looking for the ones carrying the most dangerous weapons. She spotted a man with an RPG launcher moving between buildings, trying to get into position. He was using cover well, exposing himself for only brief moments. Mitchell tracked him patiently, waiting for her opportunity. When he emerged from behind a wall to sprint to the next building, she was ready. Her shot caught him mid-stride, and he went down hard, the RPG launcher skittering across the ground. Another fighter tried to retrieve the weapon. Mitchell shot him too. A third man made the attempt, and she dropped him before he could reach it. After that, the other fighters left the RPG alone, recognizing that approaching it was suicide. One weapon system neutralized through patience and accurate fire. But there were still plenty of other threats. Mitchell shifted her focus to a group of fighters who were attempting to work their way around to the east side of the seal position. They were using a drainage ditch for cover, advancing in short rushes. She couldn't see them clearly, just occasional glimpses as they moved. But glimpses were enough. She fired at every exposed target, forcing them to slow down, making them pay for every meter of ground. Her first shot caught a man as he raised his head to look toward the seal position. He dropped back into the ditch. Mitchell didn't know if she had killed him or just wounded him, but either way, he was out of the fight. Her second shot hit another fighter who had been trying to provide covering fire. The third shot missed, the bullet impacting the dirt just in front of her target. Mitchell adjusted her aim slightly and fired again. This time the man fell. The enemy fighters in the ditch went to ground, their advance halted. Mitchell had bought her team valuable time, but she knew it wouldn't last. The enemy had too many fighters, too many different approaches they could use. She couldn't watch all of them simultaneously, couldn't stop every advance. All she could do was prioritize threats and eliminate them as efficiently as possible. The sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley, still distant but growing louder. The enemy fighters heard it too, and their movements became more urgent, more desperate. They knew their window of opportunity was closing. If the SEALs made it onto those helicopters, the mission would be a failure. The ambush, the casualties they had taken, the air strikes that had devastated their positions, all of it would be for nothing. Mitchell saw a group of 6 fighters break from cover, sprinting toward the SEAL position in a coordinated rush. They were laying down suppressive fire as they ran, forcing the SEALs to take cover. It was a bold move, aggressive and dangerous. But it was also what Mitchell had been waiting for. Fighters in the open, moving in a predictable pattern. Target-rich environment, as her instructors would have said. She took the lead man first, dropping him with a shot to the chest. The second fighter was only a step behind, and Mitchell's next shot caught him before he could react to his companion's fall. The third man tried to change direction, to throw off her aim. It didn't work. Mitchell led him slightly, compensating for his movement, and her bullet found its mark. The remaining 3 fighters dove for cover, their assault broken. But more were coming. Mitchell could see them gathering in multiple locations, preparing for simultaneous assaults from different directions. They were learning, adapting to her presence. Instead of presenting clear targets, they were using smoke and covering fire, trying to obscure her vision and make accurate shooting more difficult. It was a sound tactic, one that would probably work if she gave them enough time to coordinate. She wasn't going to give them that time. Mitchell shifted her position slightly, moving along the ridgeline to a spot that offered a better angle on one of the gathering enemy groups. She moved quickly but carefully, aware that enemy fighters might be scanning the ridgeline looking for her. The new position gave her a clear view of 6 fighters who were preparing to assault from the north. They thought they were concealed behind a low wall, but from her elevated position, Mitchell could see them clearly. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one finding a target. The enemy fighters scattered, their assault disrupted before it could begin. Mitchell immediately shifted her aim to another group on the east side. 2 more shots, 2 more targets down. She was shooting faster now, knowing that she needed to disrupt as many of these coordinated assaults as possible before they could be launched. The helicopter sounds were growing much louder now. Mitchell risked a glance toward the west and saw 2 Black Hawks approaching, flying low and fast, using the terrain to mask their approach. They were still a couple of kilometers out, maybe 90 seconds from the landing zone. 90 seconds during which the enemy would throw everything they had at preventing those helicopters from landing. A new sound cut through the chaos of the firefight, the distinctive whoosh of an RPG being launched. Mitchell's eyes snapped toward the source, and she saw the rocket streaking through the air toward one of the approaching helicopters. The pilot saw it too, reacting instantly with a sharp banking turn and deploying flares to confuse the rocket's guidance system. The RPG passed harmlessly by, detonating against the hillside beyond. But the RPG gunner was already reloading, preparing for another shot. Mitchell found him in her scope, a man crouched behind a pile of rubble, frantically working to load another rocket into the launcher. She didn't give him the chance to finish. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and sending the RPG launcher clattering to the ground. Another threat eliminated. The helicopters were closer now, their rotor wash beginning to kick up dust and debris in the landing zone. The SEALs were providing covering fire in all directions, their disciplined shooting keeping the enemy fighters at bay. But Mitchell could see that the enemy was preparing for one final push, gathering every fighter they had left for a desperate assault timed to coincide with the landing. She counted them quickly, at least 15 fighters, possibly more, spread across multiple positions. Too many to stop by herself, even with perfect shooting. Some of them would get through, would reach the landing zone. The question was whether her team could hold them off long enough to get the wounded loaded and the helicopters airborne. The first helicopter flared for landing, its nose pitching up as the pilot brought it into a hover over the landing zone. Dust exploded outward in a massive cloud, obscuring everything. The enemy fighters chose that moment to attack, rushing from multiple directions toward the swirling dust cloud. Mitchell opened fire, shooting as fast as she could while maintaining accuracy. One target down, then another. But there were too many of them, and they were using the dust cloud for cover. She saw a fighter emerge from the dust cloud's edge, his AK-47 raised toward the helicopter. Mitchell's shot caught him before he could fire, but another man appeared immediately behind him. She shot him too, but her bolt locked back on an empty magazine. She was out of ammunition in her current magazine, down to her last 30 rounds. Mitchell dropped the empty magazine and slammed in her final one, chambering around and getting back on target in less than 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds had felt like an eternity. She saw the SEAL team loading the wounded into the first helicopter, moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them. Bullets were impacting everywhere, chewing up the ground, sparking off the helicopter's armored sides. The pilot held the helicopter steady, his training and courage evident in every moment he remained in the kill zone. The door gunner was firing his minigun, the weapon's rapid fire tearing into the enemy positions with devastating effect. But return fire was heavy, and Mitchell could hear bullets pinging off the helicopter's fuselage. How long before one found something vital, before the aircraft was damaged beyond the ability to fly? More enemy fighters appeared, and Mitchell engaged them methodically. She was down to 23 rounds now. 22. 21. Each shot had to count, had to eliminate a threat or force the enemy to take cover. She was shooting faster than she liked, faster than her training recommended, but the situation demanded it. The helicopters needed to get out of there, and every second they remained on the ground increased the risk of catastrophe. The first helicopter lifted off, its nose dipping as it accelerated away from the landing zone. Mitchell felt a surge of relief. The wounded were away, evacuating to safety. But the mission wasn't over. Half the team was still on the ground, waiting for the second helicopter to land. And the enemy knew it. The second Black Hawk came in fast, its approach even more aggressive than the first. The pilot dropped it into the landing zone with barely controlled violence, the skids hitting the ground hard enough to bounce. The remaining SEALs moved toward it immediately, providing covering fire as they displaced from their defensive position. But enemy fighters were closing in from multiple directions, sensing their opportunity. If they could prevent the helicopter from taking off, if they could pin down the SEALs in the open, they might still salvage something from this disastrous ambush. She wouldn't let that happen. Mitchell fired at every target she could identify, working her rifle with mechanical precision. A fighter who appeared from behind a building went down. Another who was trying to line up a shot on the helicopter fell before he could fire. A third turned to run, and Mitchell's bullet caught him in the back. She felt no remorse, no hesitation. These men had set an ambush for her team, had wounded her brothers in arms. They deserved no mercy, and she would give them none. 15 rounds left. 14. 13. The ammunition was draining away faster than she liked, but there was no choice. The enemy was pressing hard, and every shot was necessary to keep them at bay. She saw Chun reach the helicopter, saw him turn to provide covering fire as the last SEAL team members boarded. Almost there. Just a few more seconds. A fighter emerged from a doorway not 30 meters from the helicopter, an RPG launcher on his shoulder. Mitchell's crosshairs found him instantly, but even as she squeezed the trigger, she knew she was a fraction of a second too late. The man had already fired, and the rocket was streaking toward the helicopter. Time seemed to slow. Mitchell saw the RPG racing toward its target, saw the helicopter door gunner desperately swinging his weapon around. Chin was diving for the helicopter's door, being pulled aboard by other team members. The pilot was beginning to pull collective, starting to lift the aircraft off the ground. The rocket impacted the ground directly beneath the helicopter, detonating in a massive explosion. The blast wave lifted the aircraft violently, throwing it sideways. For a moment, Mitchell thought the helicopter would crash, would slam into the ground, and explode. But the pilot fought the controls, somehow keeping the aircraft flying even as it spun and shuddered from the blast. The helicopter staggered into the air, its damaged tail rotor screaming in protest. Black smoke poured from the engine compartment. But it was flying, climbing away from the landing zone with agonizing slowness. Mitchell held her breath, willing the aircraft to keep flying, to gain enough altitude to clear the surrounding terrain. The pilot managed to get the helicopter to about 200 feet before Mitchell heard Chin's voice on the radio, strained but controlled. Overwatch, we are airborne but heavily damaged. Aircraft is barely controllable. We're going to try to make it to friendly territory, but we may have to set down short of the base. You need to extract immediately. Can you make it to the secondary extraction point? Mitchell looked at the battlefield around her. Enemy fighters were everywhere, their attention now focused on her position. They knew where she was, knew she had been the one inflicting such heavy casualties on them. And they were angry, vengeful. They would come for her with everything they had left. The secondary extraction point was 3 kilometers away, across open ground that was now fully illuminated by the rising sun. She would have no cover, no concealment. And she had 11 rounds left in her rifle, no backup weapon except for her sidearm. The odds of making it to the extraction point alive were not good. But Mitchell had never been one to give up. She keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the situation. Copy, ground team leader. I'll make it to secondary extraction. You get that bird to safety. I'll see you back at base. The debriefing room at the forward operating base was uncomfortably cold, the air conditioning running at full blast in a futile attempt to combat the Afghan heat. Mitchell sat at a long metal table, still wearing her dusty combat uniform, a bottle of water in front of her that she had been sipping from for the past hour. Across from her sat 3 officers, their faces serious as they reviewed the mission reports and her initial statement. Chun sat beside her, his arm in a sling from injuries sustained during the helicopter extraction. The other team members who hadn't been seriously wounded were waiting outside, already debriefed individually. Now it was Mitchell's turn to go through everything in detail, to recount every decision, every shot, every moment of the mission that had gone so catastrophically wrong, and yet somehow ended with everyone alive. Colonel James Harrison, the Special Operations Task Force commander, looked up from the report in front of him. He was a career officer with nearly 30 years of experience, a man who had seen more combat than most people could imagine. But even he seemed impressed by what had transpired. Sergeant Mitchell, I want to make sure I have this right. You engaged and eliminated 12 enemy combatants during the initial ambush and extraction. Is that correct? Mitchell nodded. Yes, sir. Confirmed kills. There may have been more that I wounded or that died from injuries after the engagement, but I can confirm 12 direct kills during the firefight at the village. The colonel made a note on his pad. And during your withdrawal to the secondary extraction point, you engaged additional enemy forces. How many combatants would you estimate you encountered during that phase? At least 8 more, sir. 4 at the ambush position in the riverbed, and approximately 4 more at the extraction point itself, plus the fighters who were pursuing me across the open ground, though I can only confirm hits on 3 of them. Major Sarah Williams, the intelligence officer, leaned forward. That's a total of approximately 20 confirmed enemy kills, possibly more, in a single engagement, while operating alone and under extreme duress. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Sergeant, that's extraordinary. We're talking about one of the highest individual body counts in a single action that we've recorded in this theater of operations. Mitchell felt uncomfortable with the attention. She took another sip of water before responding. I was just doing my job, ma'am. The team needed suppressive fire and overwatch. I provided it. The circumstances were unusual, but the fundamentals were the same as any other engagement. Chin spoke up, his voice carrying a note of pride. With all due respect, Colonel, what Sergeant Mitchell is describing as just doing her job was actually one of the most remarkable displays of marksmanship and tactical awareness I've ever witnessed. She held off an enemy force that outnumbered us more than 3 to 1. She disrupted multiple coordinated assaults. She neutralized RPG teams that would have destroyed our helicopters. Without her actions, this would have been a complete disaster. We would all be dead or captured. The third officer, Captain David Park, the operations officer, nodded in agreement. The preliminary analysis of the engagement supports Lieutenant Chin's assessment. The enemy forces were well-trained, well-equipped, and had established a sophisticated ambush. They had RPGs, heavy machine guns, and what appears to have been professional military training. This wasn't a ragtag militia group. These were serious fighters, and Sergeant Mitchell single-handedly prevented them from achieving their objective. Colonel Harrison sat back in his chair, studying Mitchell carefully. Tell me about the shot on the technical vehicle. The one with the mounted machine gun. That was, what, for 100 meters? On a moving target. Mitchell thought back to that moment, remembering the truck bouncing across the rough ground, the gunner swinging his weapon toward her teammates. Approximately 400 meters, sir. Maybe 420. The vehicle was moving at about 25 kilometers per hour across uneven terrain. I led the target to compensate for movement and took the shot. The gunner went down, and I followed up with a shot to the engine block to disable the vehicle. 2 shots, 2 hits, on a moving target at 400 meters, in combat conditions, under stress. The colonel shook his head slightly. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Sergeant? My father was a Marine Corps sniper, sir. He taught me to shoot when I was young. I grew up hunting in Montana, taking long-range shots at moving targets in difficult conditions. When I joined the military, I built on that foundation with professional training. Major Williams consulted her notes. Your marksmanship scores are exceptional across the board. You qualified expert on every weapon system you've been tested on. You've completed advanced sniper training, close-quarters battle training, and multiple other specialized courses. Your instructors consistently rated you in the top 1% of students. Mitchell shrugged slightly. I take my training seriously, ma'am, and I practice regularly. Marksmanship is a perishable skill. If you don't practice, you lose your edge. Colonel Harrison tapped his pen on the table thoughtfully. Let's talk about the decision to remain in position after the rest of the team was extracted. You knew you would be facing a significant enemy force alone. You knew your ammunition was limited. You knew the risks. Why did you stay? It was a question Mitchell had expected, and she had her answer ready. Sir, the team needed suppressive fire to get the wounded evacuated. The helicopters needed protection during landing and takeoff. If I had withdrawn with the rest of the team, the enemy would have been free to concentrate all their fire on the landing zone. The helicopters would have been destroyed, and the team would have been trapped. Staying in position was the tactically sound decision. It was also extremely dangerous, Captain Park pointed out. You were isolated, outnumbered, and low on ammunition. If the extraction helicopter had been delayed or unable to reach you, you would have been in an untenable position. Yes, sir. But that was a risk I was willing to take. My teammates' lives were at stake. The mission's success was at stake. Those factors outweighed the personal risk. Chen interjected again. She saved our lives, Colonel. All of us. There's no question about that. If Sergeant Mitchell had withdrawn with us, we wouldn't be having this conversation because we'd all be dead. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. I understand that, Lieutenant. And I want to be clear that I'm not questioning Sergeant Mitchell's decision or her actions. I'm trying to understand her thought process, her reasoning. Because what she did goes beyond standard operating procedure. It goes beyond what we normally expect, even from SEALs. And I need to know if her actions were the result of careful tactical thinking or something else. Mitchell met the colonel's gaze directly. Sir, every decision I made during that engagement was based on my training and my assessment of the tactical situation. I didn't take unnecessary risks. I didn't act recklessly. I evaluated the situation, determined the best course of action, and executed it. That's what we're trained to do. The colonel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Let's move on. Tell me about the withdrawal to the secondary extraction point. You were being pursued by multiple enemy fighters. How did you manage to evade them while covering that much ground? Mitchell walked them through her route, explaining how she had used terrain to her advantage, how she had employed the smoke grenade to break contact, how she had moved along the riverbed to avoid observation. She described the ambush position she had encountered and how she had eliminated those fighters. She detailed the final firefight at the extraction point and the damage the helicopter had sustained. The officers listened intently, occasionally asking questions or requesting clarification on specific points. The debriefing lasted nearly 3 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from the initial insertion to the final extraction. By the time they were finished, Mitchell felt emotionally drained, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the combat now completely depleted. Colonel Harrison closed his notebook and looked at both Mitchell and Chun. Thank you both for your detailed accounts. I know this has been difficult, especially given the casualties we sustained. I want you to know that this debriefing is not about assigning blame. The intelligence we received was faulty. The enemy was better prepared and more numerous than we anticipated. Those factors were beyond your control. What matters is how you responded to the situation, and, by all accounts, you responded with exceptional skill and courage. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I'm going to be recommending both of you for decorations. Lieutenant Chun, you showed outstanding leadership in an extremely difficult situation. You got your wounded out and kept your team together under the worst possible circumstances. And, Sergeant Mitchell, your actions during this engagement were nothing short of extraordinary. I'll be recommending you for the Silver Star, possibly higher depending on how the final after-action review goes. Mitchell felt a surge of discomfort. She had never sought medals or recognition. She did her job because it needed to be done, because her teammates depended on her. The idea of receiving a high-level decoration felt wrong somehow, like she was being rewarded for simply doing what anyone in her position should have done. Sir, with respect, I don't think that's necessary, she said. I was just doing my job. Any member of the team would have done the same thing in my position. Colonel Harrison shook his head firmly. That's where you're wrong, Sergeant. Not everyone could have done what you did. The marksmanship alone is exceptional, but it's more than that. It's the decision-making under pressure, the tactical awareness, the ability to remain calm and effective when everything is going wrong. Those are rare qualities, and they deserve recognition. Major Williams spoke up. There's also a broader consideration here, Sergeant. Your actions during this engagement are going to be studied, analyzed, and used as a training example for years to come. You've demonstrated capabilities that many people didn't think were possible, especially for a female soldier in a combat role. Whether you want it or not, you're going to be held up as an example of what's possible when soldiers are properly trained and given the opportunity to prove themselves. Mitchell understood what the major was saying, and part of her recognized the truth in it. She had fought hard for the opportunity to serve in special operations, had faced skepticism and resistance from people who didn't think women belonged in combat roles. Her success on this mission would be used to support arguments for expanded opportunities for female soldiers. It was a responsibility she hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. I understand, ma'am. I just hope that the focus remains on the training and the tactics, not on my gender. Any soldier, male or female, with the right training and the right mindset can be effective in combat. That's the message I hope people take from this. The colonel stood, signaling the end of the debriefing. That's a good perspective, Sergeant. And it's one I'll make sure is emphasized in our reports. Now, both of you get some rest. You've earned it. We'll have additional debriefings over the next few days as we piece together exactly what happened and how we can prevent similar situations in the future. But for now, you're dismissed. Mitchell and Chun stood, saluted, and left the debriefing room. Outside, the rest of the team was waiting, their faces showing relief when they saw their teammates emerge. They had all been through the individual debriefings, but this was the first time they had all been together since the mission. Petty Officer James Rodriguez, one of the team's breachers, stepped forward. How'd it go? Chin smiled tiredly. About as well as could be expected. They're recommending decorations for the team. Mitchell's getting a silver star, maybe more. The team members exchanged glances, then broke into grins. Several of them moved forward to congratulate Mitchell, clapping her on the shoulder or shaking her hand. She felt embarrassed by the attention, but appreciated the support. These men were her brothers in arms, people she would trust with her life. Their respect meant more to her than any medal. You saved our asses out there, Rodriguez said simply. We all know it. You're a badass, Mitchell. Another team member, Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, nodded in agreement. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. 20+ confirmed kills in a single engagement? That's legendary stuff. Mitchell held up her hands, trying to deflect the praise. It was a team effort. Everyone played their part. I just had good positioning and got lucky with my shots. Lucky? Chun laughed. Mitchell, luck is when you make one good shot under pressure. What you did was pure skill. Don't diminish your accomplishment. Own it. They walked together toward the barracks, a tight-knit group bound by shared experience and mutual respect. Along the way, they passed other soldiers who had heard about the mission, about the ambush and the desperate fighting. Word spread quickly on a base like this, and Mitchell could see people pointing and whispering as they passed. One young soldier, probably fresh out of basic training, approached nervously. Excuse me, are you Sergeant Mitchell? Mitchell stopped, surprised. Yes, I am. Can I help you? The soldier's face lit up with excitement. I just wanted to say thank you, ma'am. My brother is in one of the helicopter units, and he told me what you did. How you protected the extraction birds and took out all those enemy fighters. It's amazing. You're like a real-life action hero. Mitchell felt her face flush with embarrassment. I'm not a hero, soldier. I'm just a SEAL who did her job. Your brother and his fellow pilots are the real heroes. They flew into a hot landing zone to pull us out. That takes serious courage. The young soldier nodded enthusiastically, clearly starstruck. Still, what you did was incredible. I'm in training to become a gunner, and my instructors are already talking about your engagement. They're saying it's going to be used as a case study in marksmanship and tactical employment. After the soldier left, Chun looked at Mitchell with an amused expression. Get used to it. You're famous now, whether you like it or not. That engagement is going to follow you for the rest of your career. Mitchell sighed. I just wanted to do my job and help my team. I didn't sign up for fame. Nobody ever does, Chun replied. But sometimes fame finds you anyway. The question is what you do with it. You can use it to make a positive impact, to inspire others, to push for improvements in training and tactics. Or you can try to hide from it and let others define your story for you. They reached the barracks, and the team dispersed to their individual rooms. Mitchell entered her small quarters, finally, alone for the first time in what felt like days. She stripped off her dusty uniform, wincing as she discovered bruises and scrapes she hadn't noticed during the fighting. Her body was a roadmap of the mission, every injury a reminder of how close they had all come to dying. She took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the grime and blood. As she stood under the spray, Mitchell allowed herself to process what had happened. She had killed more than 20 men today, 20 lives ended by her hand. It was something she would carry with her forever, a weight that could never be fully set down. But she also knew that every man she had killed had been trying to kill her teammates. They had set an ambush, had used IEDs and RPGs, had shown no mercy. In that context, her actions had been justified, necessary. It didn't make the weight any lighter, but it made it bearable. After the shower, Mitchell lay down on her bunk, intending to just rest for a moment. Within seconds, she was asleep, her exhausted body finally claiming the rest it desperately needed. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, for 12 hours straight. When she finally woke, it was evening. Mitchell felt stiff and sore, every muscle in her body protesting as she sat up. But she also felt more clear-headed, more settled. The mission was over. She had survived. Her team had survived. Now it was time to move forward, to learn from what had happened, and prepare for the next mission. There would always be a next mission. That was the nature of the job, and Mitchell would be ready for it, just as she had been ready for this one. Because that's what SEALs did. They trained, they prepared, and they accomplished the mission no matter how difficult the circumstances. She got dressed and headed to the mess hall for food, her first real meal since before the mission. As she entered, conversations paused, and people looked up at her. Mitchell ignored the attention, got her food, and found a quiet corner to eat. But even there, she couldn't escape completely. Several officers and senior NCOs stopped by her table to offer congratulations or ask about the mission. Mitchell answered politely, but briefly, not wanting to rehash every detail again. She just wanted to eat, to refuel her body, and to start getting back to normal. Whatever normal meant after a mission like that. As she was finishing her meal, Colonel Harrison entered the mess hall and spotted her. He walked over, his expression serious. "Sergeant Mitchell, I need a word with you in private." Mitchell stood immediately, following the colonel to a quiet office adjacent to the mess hall. Once inside, Harrison closed the door and gestured for her to sit. "I've just received word from higher headquarters. They've reviewed the preliminary after-action reports, and there's significant interest in your actions during the engagement. Very significant interest." Mitchell felt a sense of dread. "What kind of interest, sir?" The colonel leaned against his desk. "The kind that comes from the very top of the command structure. You're being flown back to the States for a more detailed debriefing and possibly some media opportunities. The brass wants to highlight your success, use it to demonstrate the effectiveness of allowing women in combat roles." Mitchell's heart sank. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't want to be used as propaganda. I just want to get back to my team and continue doing my job." Harrison nodded sympathetically. "I understand that, Sergeant. And I told them as much. But this is bigger than you or me. There are political considerations at play, policy decisions being made at the highest levels. Your actions have provided ammunition, if you'll pardon the expression, for people who support expanded opportunities for female soldiers. They want to showcase that." The Pentagon briefing room was nothing like the rough forward operating base where Mitchell had spent the past 2 years. Everything here was polished, professional, and carefully controlled. The walls were covered with official photographs and military insignia. The podium at the front of the room bore the seal of the Department of Defense. Rows of seats were filling with journalists, their cameras, and recording equipment ready to capture every word. Mitchell stood in a side room, adjusting her dress uniform for what felt like the 100th time. The Silver Star Medal she had been awarded 3 days earlier rested on her chest, along with her other decorations. She felt uncomfortable in the formal uniform, far preferring her combat gear. But this was part of the job now, whether she liked it or not. A public affairs officer, Captain Linda Martinez, entered the room. 5 minutes, Sergeant. Are you ready?" Mitchell took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be. What do I need to remember?" "Just tell your story honestly and professionally. Don't embellish, don't downplay. The facts speak for themselves. And remember, you're representing not just yourself, but all the women who want to serve in combat roles." "No pressure," Martinez added with a slight smile. "None at all," Mitchell replied dryly. The door opened again, and Major General Robert Hayes entered, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. He was a legend in the SEAL community, a man who had risen from enlisted ranks to his current position through decades of exceptional service. Mitchell came to attention immediately. "At ease, Sergeant," Hayes said. "I just wanted to have a quick word with you before we go out there. How are you holding up?" "Fine, sir. just not used to all this attention. Hayes nodded understandingly. I know it's overwhelming, but what you did deserves recognition, and more importantly, it deserves to be shared. There are young women across this country who dream of serving in special operations, but think it's impossible. You've shown them it's not. That matters. He paused, studying her carefully. I've read the after-action reports. All of them. I've talked to Lieutenant Chun and the rest of your team. And I've reviewed the tactical analysis of the engagement. What you did out there was exceptional by any standard, regardless of gender. You saved lives through skill, courage, and tactical brilliance. Never forget that. Mitchell felt a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you. You've earned the respect of the entire special operations community, Hayes continued. Now go out there and help us change some minds about what's possible. Show them that capability matters more than gender. Can you do that? Yes, sir. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask. Hayes checked his watch. Time to go? Remember, just tell the truth. The truth is powerful enough. They walked together to the briefing room, entering from a side door. The room fell silent as they appeared, cameras clicking and recording lights activating. General Hayes approached the podium first, his bearing commanding immediate attention. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Today, I have the privilege of introducing you to one of our nation's most exceptional warriors. Sergeant Sarah Mitchell has recently returned from Afghanistan, where she participated in an operation that exemplifies the courage, skill, and dedication of our Special Operations Forces. He went on to describe the mission in general terms, careful not to reveal classified information, but providing enough detail to convey the significance of what had happened. As he spoke, images appeared on screens behind him, showing the terrain, the village, and sanitized versions of the tactical situation. During this engagement, Sergeant Mitchell single-handedly engaged and eliminated more than 20 enemy combatants while providing overwatch and suppressive fire for her team. Her actions directly resulted in the successful extraction of wounded personnel and prevented the loss of multiple aircraft. For her extraordinary heroism, Sergeant Mitchell has been awarded the Silver Star, and she is being considered for even higher recognition. Hayes turned to Mitchell. Sergeant Mitchell, would you please join me at the podium? Mitchell walked forward, acutely aware of every camera focused on her. She stood beside the general, her hands clasped behind her back in a parade rest position. Hayes continued speaking, providing more details about her background, training, and service record. Then, he stepped aside, and Mitchell was alone at the podium, facing a room full of journalists and cameras. Sergeant Mitchell, please tell us in your own words what happened during this engagement. Mitchell took a breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite her nervousness. She walked through the mission chronologically, from the initial insertion to the discovery of the ambush, through the firefight and the extraction. She described the tactical decisions she had made, the challenges she had faced, and how her training had prepared her for the situation. As she spoke, Mitchell was careful to emphasize the team aspect of the mission. I want to be clear that I didn't do this alone. My entire team performed exceptionally. Lieutenant Chin's leadership kept everyone focused and coordinated. The helicopter pilots showed tremendous courage flying into a hot landing zone. The door gunners provided critical fire support. My actions were just one part of a larger team effort. When she finished her prepared remarks, General Hayes opened the floor to questions. Hands shot up immediately, and Hayes pointed to a reporter in the front row. Sergeant Mitchell, you eliminated more than 20 enemy combatants in a single engagement. Can you describe what that experience was like? How do you process something like that? Mitchell had anticipated this question. It's not something I take lightly. Every shot I took was necessary to protect my teammates and accomplish the mission. These were enemy combatants who had set an ambush and were actively trying to kill American forces. In that context, my actions were justified. But I also recognize that every life taken has weight and meaning. It's something I'll carry with me always. Another reporter stood. There's been significant debate about women serving in combat roles, particularly in special operations. Do you think your actions demonstrate that women can perform at the same level as their male counterparts? Mitchell chose her words carefully. I think my actions demonstrate that properly trained soldiers, regardless of gender, can be effective in combat. The question shouldn't be whether someone is male or female. The question should be whether they have the skills, the training, and the mental fortitude to do the job. There are plenty of women who meet those standards, just as there are plenty of men who don't. We should be focusing on capability, not biology. A third reporter, a woman from a major news network, raised her hand. What would you say to young women who are considering military service, particularly in combat roles? Mitchell thought about this question for a moment before responding. I would say that if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of, if you're willing to embrace the training and the discipline required, then you can succeed. It won't be easy. You'll face skepticism, you'll face challenges, you'll have to prove yourself again and again. But that's true for anyone in special operations, regardless of gender. The key is to never give up, to never let anyone convince you that you can't do something just because of your gender. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from her training methodology to her thoughts on military policy to her plans for the future. Mitchell answered each question honestly and thoughtfully, aware that her words would be analyzed and debated long after this briefing ended. Finally, General Hayes stepped forward to close the session. Thank you all for your time and attention. Sergeant Mitchell needs to return to her duties, but we hope this briefing has provided you with insight into the exceptional capabilities of our Special Operations Forces and the expanding opportunities for women in the military. As the cameras stopped recording and journalists began packing up their equipment, several people approached Mitchell personally. Some were reporters seeking follow-up interviews. Others were military officials congratulating her. A few were advocates for women's rights in the military, thanking her for her service and her example. Through it all, Mitchell remained professional and courteous, but she felt increasingly drained. This wasn't her natural environment. She was a soldier, a warrior. She belonged in the field, not behind a podium. But she understood the importance of what she was doing, the doors it might open for others. Over the following weeks, Mitchell's story spread across the country. News outlets ran features on her background and her mission. Military publications analyzed her tactics and marksmanship. Social media exploded with reactions, both positive and negative. Some praised her as a hero and a trailblazer. Others questioned the veracity of the reports or argued that women still didn't belong in combat roles. Mitchell tried to ignore the public reaction, focusing instead on the letters she received from young women inspired by her story. Many wrote about their own desires to serve in the military, their own struggles against skepticism and prejudice. These letters reminded Mitchell why she had agreed to participate in the media events, why she had shared her story publicly. One letter in particular stuck with her. It came from a 17-year-old girl in Montana, not far from where Mitchell had grown up. The girl wrote about how she had always wanted to be a soldier, but had been told by teachers, parents, and friends that women couldn't succeed in combat roles. Mitchell's story had changed her mind, had given her the courage to pursue her dreams. She was joining the Army after graduation and hoped to eventually try out for special operations. Mitchell wrote back personally, encouraging the young woman and offering advice. She explained that the path would be difficult, that there would be setbacks and challenges. But she also emphasized that success was possible with dedication and hard work. It was a small gesture, but it felt more meaningful to Mitchell than any medal or public recognition. As the media attention gradually faded, Mitchell was given the option of where she wanted to serve next. She could have requested assignment as an instructor, teaching the next generation of special operations soldiers. She could have taken a position at a training command, developing curriculum and tactics. Many people in her position would have chosen these safer, more prestigious assignments. But Mitchell chose to return to Afghanistan to rejoin her team. When General Hayes asked her why, her answer was simple. "That's where I belong, sir. That's where I can make the most difference. My team is still deployed, still conducting missions. They need experienced operators. I want to be there with them." Hayes had smiled at that response. "I thought you might say that. Your team will be glad to have you back. But, Mitchell, understand that you've become more than just another team member. You're a symbol now, whether you want to be or not. People are watching you, looking to you as an example. That's a responsibility you'll carry for the rest of your career. I understand, sir. And I'll do my best to be worthy of it. But my first responsibility is to my team and to the mission. Everything else is secondary. 3 months after the engagement that had made her famous, Mitchell found herself back in Afghanistan, back with her team. They welcomed her like she had never left, though there were new faces among them. 2 of the SEALs who had been wounded in the ambush had recovered and returned to duty. The others had been replaced by new operators, men who knew Mitchell's reputation but treated her like any other team member. Chun, now a lieutenant commander after his promotion, briefed the team on their next mission. Intelligence had located another high-value target, another Taliban commander operating in the mountains. It would be a difficult operation, requiring infiltration deep into enemy territory. The risks were significant, but the potential payoff was worth it. As Chun outlined the plan, Mitchell found herself analyzing the terrain, considering fields of fire, thinking through contingencies. This was what she was trained for, what she was meant to do. Not press conferences or public appearances, but tactical operations in support of strategic objectives. This was home. After the briefing, Rodriguez approached her. "It's good to have you back, Mitchell. Team wasn't the same without you." "It's good to be back," Mitchell replied honestly. "I've had enough of briefing rooms and cameras. Give me a rifle and a mission any day." "Amen to that," Rodriguez agreed. He paused, then added, "You know, a lot has changed since you've been gone. The higher-ups are taking women in combat roles more seriously now. There are more female candidates going through the pipeline for special operations. Several female soldiers have asked about you, asked for advice on how to follow in your footsteps." Mitchell nodded. "I've been getting letters, emails, requests for mentorship. I try to respond to as many as I can." "That's good. Those women need role models, need to know it's possible. You've shown them that." Rodriguez grinned. "Though I have to say, you set the bar pretty damn high. 20-plus confirmed kills in a single engagement? That's a tough act to follow." "It wasn't about the numbers," Mitchell said seriously. "It was about doing what needed to be done to protect the team and accomplish the mission. That's what I tell anyone who asks for advice. Focus on the mission, not on the recognition. The recognition is just noise." The conversation was interrupted by Chun calling the team together for final preparations. Over the next several hours, they would check equipment, review contingency plans, and conduct rehearsals. Then, as darkness fell, they would board helicopters for another insertion into hostile territory. Another mission, another opportunity to put their training and skills to the test. As Mitchell checked her weapons and gear, she thought about everything that had happened over the past months. The ambush, the firefight, the awards, the media attention, the return to duty. It had been a whirlwind, but through it all, she had stayed true to herself and to her values. She hadn't let fame change who she was or what she believed in. She thought about her father's lessons, about patience and discipline and staying calm under pressure. Those lessons had saved her life and the lives of her teammates. Now she had an opportunity to pass those lessons on to others, to help shape the next generation of soldiers. It was a responsibility she took seriously. But tonight, the focus was on the mission ahead, on getting her team inserted safely, executing the operation successfully, and bringing everyone home alive. Everything else, all the attention and recognition and symbolism, faded into the background. All that mattered was the mission and the team. Mitchell loaded her rifle, chambered a round, and applied the safety. The weapon felt comfortable in her hands, familiar and reassuring. This was her tool, her instrument of precision. She had trained with it for thousands of hours, had fired tens of thousands of rounds through it. It was an extension of herself, and she trusted it completely. Around her, the rest of the team was going through similar preparations. Each man focused on his assigned tasks, double-checking equipment, and running through mental rehearsals. They were professionals, warriors who took their craft seriously. Mitchell was proud to serve alongside them, proud to be part of this elite community. Chin appeared at her side, his own gear prepared. "Ready for another trip into the mountains?" Mitchell smiled. "Always, sir. Let's go find this guy and bring him to justice." "That's the spirit." "And Mitchell, thanks for coming back. We really did need you here." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," Mitchell replied honestly. As the sun set and darkness fell over the base, the team moved toward the waiting helicopters. This was familiar ground now, a routine they had followed countless times. Insert under cover of darkness. Move to the target location. Execute the mission. Extract before dawn. It was dangerous work, but it was work they were trained for, work they believed in. Mitchell climbed aboard the helicopter and took her seat, her rifle held across her lap. Around her, the rest of the team was settling in, each man lost in his own thoughts. The engines whined to life, and the rotors began to turn, gradually building speed. Within minutes, they would be airborne, heading into the night, and toward another challenge. As the helicopter lifted off and banked toward the mountains, Mitchell felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was where she belonged, doing this work with these people. The medals and recognition were nice, but they weren't why she served. She served because she believed in the mission, believed in protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. She served because her teammates depended on her, and she would never let them down. The helicopter flew through the darkness, its navigation lights extinguished to avoid detection. Inside, the team sat in silence, each operator preparing mentally for what lay ahead. They were flying into danger, into uncertainty. But they were doing it together, as a team, as brothers and sisters in arms. Mitchell looked around at the faces of her teammates, these men who had become like family to her. They had accepted her not because of her gender, but because of her capabilities, her dedication, her willingness to put the mission and the team above all else. She had earned their respect through action, through performance, through being there when it mattered most. And she would continue to earn it, mission after mission, for as long as she served. Not because she wanted recognition or awards or fame, but because this was who she was. A warrior, a SEAL, a protector. It was a calling, not just a job, and she embraced it fully. The helicopter banked again, descending toward the landing zone. Mitchell checked her weapon one final time, confirming it was ready. Around her, the team was doing the same, going through their pre-insertion checks with automatic precision. They had done this so many times it was second nature. But Mitchell never took these moments for granted. Every mission was dangerous. Every insertion carried risk. One mistake, one moment of inattention, could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. So she stayed focused, stayed alert, stayed ready for whatever might come. The helicopter touched down, and the team poured out, spreading into a defensive formation. Mitchell moved to her position, her rifle up and ready. The helicopter lifted off behind them, its sound gradually fading into the distance. They were alone now, deep in enemy territory, miles from any support. But they weren't afraid. They were confident, well-trained, and utterly committed to accomplishing their mission. They were SEALs, the finest special operations force in the world. And they would succeed because failure was not an option. Mitchell scanned her sector through her night vision device, searching for threats. The terrain was clear, the night quiet except for the wind whistling through the mountains. Chun gave the hand signal to move out, and the team began their infiltration, ghosts in the darkness moving toward their objective. As she moved through the night, Mitchell thought about the young women who were following in her footsteps, who were inspired by her story to pursue their own dreams of military service. She hoped they understood that success in this field wasn't about gender or politics or breaking barriers. It was about skill, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the mission and the team. She hoped they understood that there would be challenges, that they would have to work harder than most to prove themselves, that they would face skepticism and resistance. But she also hoped they understood that it was worth it, that the opportunity to serve alongside the finest warriors in the world, to make a real difference in protecting innocent people, was worth any price. The team reached a checkpoint, and Chun signaled a brief halt. They took the opportunity to drink water and check their bearings. They were making good time, ahead of schedule. If everything went according to plan, they would be in position before dawn, ready to conduct the operation. Mitchell took a sip from her canteen, savoring the cool water. Her body was already adapting to the thin mountain air, her breathing steady despite the altitude and the weight of her gear. This was what years of training and conditioning produced, the ability to function at a high level in the most demanding environments. Chen gave the signal to move again, and they continued their infiltration. The mountains loomed around them, silent sentinels watching their progress. Somewhere ahead in the darkness was their target, unaware that justice was coming for him. Mitchell smiled grimly. They would find him. They would complete the mission. They always did, because they were SEALs. And SEALs never quit. They never failed. They never stopped pushing forward, no matter how difficult the mission, no matter how dangerous the circumstances. It was a standard they had set for themselves, a standard Mitchell was proud to uphold. As the team disappeared into the darkness, heading deeper into the mountains, Mitchell knew that this was just one mission among many, one night in a career that would span years. There would be other engagements, other firefights, other moments when everything hung in the balance. And she would face each one with the same courage, skill, and dedication that had carried her through the ambush that had made her famous. But, more importantly, she would face each challenge knowing that she was part of something larger than herself. She was part of a tradition of service and sacrifice that stretched back generations. She was part of a team that would face any danger to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And she was helping to pave the way for future generations of female warriors who would follow in her footsteps. The mission continued through the night, and Mitchell moved with her team through the darkness, ready for whatever might come. Because this was who she was, and this was what she did. And she wouldn't have it any other way. And what if I refuse? Mitchell asked, though she already knew the answer. Then, you'll be ordered to comply, Harrison said bluntly. You're a soldier, Sergeant. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do because it serves a larger purpose. In this case, your participation in these briefings and media events could help open doors for thousands of other female soldiers who want to serve in combat roles. That's worth some personal discomfort, don't you think? Mitchell thought about the young women she had mentored over the years, the ones who had asked her advice about serving in special operations, who had looked up to her as a role model. She thought about the barriers that still existed, the resistance that female soldiers still faced. If her story could help break down some of those barriers, could help create more opportunities, maybe it was worth the discomfort. When do I leave, sir? She asked quietly. Tomorrow morning. A transport flight is being arranged. You'll be back stateside within 48 hours. Harrison paused, then added, For what it's worth, Sergeant, I think you're handling this with a lot of grace. A lot of people would let this kind of attention go to their heads. But you're staying focused on what matters, on the mission and the team. That says a lot about your character. Mitchell stood and saluted. Thank you, sir. I'll be ready tomorrow. As she left the office, Mitchell felt a mix of emotions. Pride in what she had accomplished, anxiety about the attention it was bringing, and determination to use whatever platform she was given to help other soldiers. The mission in Afghanistan might be over, but, in many ways, a new mission was just beginning. Chen's response was immediate and filled with an emotion he rarely showed. Mitchell, you've done enough. More than enough. If you can't make it out, find a hide position and call for extraction when things cool down. Don't take unnecessary risks. But Mitchell was already moving, gathering her gear and preparing to displace from her current position. Unnecessary risks were part of the job description. She had signed up for this, had volunteered for one of the most dangerous assignments in the military. And she had made a promise to herself years ago that she would never leave anyone behind, would never fail to complete her mission. She took one last look at the village below, at the enemy fighters beginning to organize a pursuit. Then, she turned and began to move, heading west toward the extraction point. 3 kilometers of open ground, 11 rounds in her rifle, and an unknown number of enemy fighters between her and safety. The sun was fully up now, the temperature already climbing. It was going to be a long day, but Mitchell had faced long days before. She would face this one the same way she had faced all the others, with courage, skill, and an absolute refusal to quit. Her team was depending on her to make it out. She wouldn't let them down. Ted and Mitchell had never failed to complete a mission before. She wasn't about to start now. Affirmative, ground team leader. I'll hold as long as needed. Just make sure those birds are ready to go when I get down there. Chen's response carried a note of what might have been relief or respect, perhaps both. Copy that, Overwatch. We'll be ready. And Mitchell? Thanks. We'd all be dead without you. Mitchell didn't respond. She was already scanning for targets, conserving her remaining ammunition, preparing for the final phase of the fight. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the stars fading as dawn approached. Soon there would be nowhere to hide, for her or for the enemy. It would be a race to see who could hold out longer. She settled in behind her rifle, controlling her breathing, and waited. The enemy would come again. They always did. And when they did, she would be ready. That was her job. That was what she had trained for her entire adult life. And she would not fail her team.